it's such an interesting way of connecting the university, bookstore at the university, with alumni, and with Rogers TV, and with the Central Library. So one of the things that is missing in London is a connection, great connection between Western and the other community.
It applies to me as much as anybody. I'm too busy most of the time doing jobs and living my life that I don't do enough reading of certainly fiction. And so when you get involved in a program like this that puts a book in front of you and says, "Here, have a look at this," it's a good thing. And I think if we can persuade other people to do the same thing, great. I mean, my reading is primarily nonfiction, because of the job that I do, and so it's neat. It's just neat to be able to go and find something again totally foreign. I didn't know who she was, and I didn't know what this book was. But when I was done it, I thought it was great, and I think other people, could do the same thing. There's not a chance that I would have walked into a bookstore and said, "You know what? I think this Gil Adamson. Gil Adamson, she's quite a poet. I think she's got a real future as a novelist." And I don't read at the same level that Penn Kemp reads. I mean, and I marvel when I listen to Penn describe, a lot of the metaphors and the names, even the names. I don't get that. I don't understand that. When she says that, I'm going, okay, yeah, there was a reason for that. It wasn't just a random name, But you're very absolutely correct about this character. I mean, look at the front. They don't even show her face. You've got this black figure. And she's always running, and she's always moving, and they describe her clothing a lot more than they describe her.
And Bill Moreland, he was such a more land, let's have more space, let's have more privacy, and he would go up into these Nietzschean heights of alpine desert, just where there's nothing but snow and ice, and then he'd go right to the borderline of what starvation or what human existence could do. So he was always pushing the limits vertically. Whereas, the trajectories in that novel are interesting because there's that vertical trajectory. He's always going higher and out of the way for people, and then there's the miners.
Yeah. Well, he was the ultimate seeker of freedom, wasn't he? He was nervous about getting tied down. That's what I thought. I don't think. There's probably much more to it than that. But that's his nature. His nature was to be free. And,
he's just a guy.
No, well, yeah. Ultimately, maybe that's what she was saying, but I think he loved her. He probably never encountered that before. So his reaction to most everything is to keep moving. So he just moved on.
More land, more land.
Yeah, less woman.
I did enjoy the book, The Outlander, because it's a Gothic romance, but done in such an extravagantly direct but metaphoric style. I adored it. It's a Western with a vengeance, a Western with a female outlaw hero. Very cool.
She's a murderer, and she's fleeing from her dead husband's brothers. And again, she's, as Penn said, throughout the story, she's constantly being sought by somebody, including herself. But I guess near the end, I started to regard her as a heroine. But I couldn't decide as I'm reading this book: is she good? Is she essentially a good person? Is she evil? Does it matter? And I don't think that Jill necessarily wants us to. She doesn't want to present her one way or the other. I don't think. She's this kind of neutral, blank figure. In a sense, this was like a school project for me. It was like I'm taking part in London Reads, and here's your book. It's The Outlander, and I'm looking at the book. I've never heard of Gil Adamson at this point, and then so it sat at home for about maybe a month and a half. And during the Christmas break, I thought, you know what, I've got to read this book. It was like a homework assignment. I felt like I was in high school and that I had to read this book. And so I kind of went into it with almost a resentment, like, oh, I've got to read this book. I would never buy this book, And then I started to read it, and frankly, for the first maybe 30 or 40 pages, I was kind of, it's okay, it's kind of interesting. I like the premise of it, but it didn't really get me. But then it did.
The dwarf and the woman, lucky miscreants, outlanders, errors that should not exist, but lived on anyway. The dwarf and the woman.
That's a good one. I kind of like the Reverend myself. I like way that he would convey the good word to his parishioners by engaging in fistfights with them. I thought that was an interesting character. And I liked the fact that he wasn't particularly adept with a hammer and nail, because I'm not either. But he made do, you know, and I was kind of a fan of him.
Such a kind man.
Yeah, a kind guy I like to punch you in the face.
She's almost a cipher. Everybody projects their images of who she is onto her, especially the man, because she's young and beautiful. And Gil Adamson does not describe her. I read it carefully. I had to read it twice. Once I sped read it because I had to stay up to 3 a.m. to finish it. And the second time I read it, really knowing the plot and looking at how it was constructed. And she was not described. The first thing she's described as is beautiful. Okay. 19. Okay.
I almost saw her as mentally ill. But
She
then
saw
when I visited
herself
with
as
schizophrenia,
Half mad.
She saw herself as a
because she was hearing the voices and whatnot, and I really, truly believe, I had to keep reminding myself how young she was.
19.
Yeah.
And surviving and going just on sheer instincts to survive. I'm really biased, having got to know Jill. I know how compassionate she is, but she's also extremely objective. So I think you're reading objectivity, which is perhaps the largest form of compassion.
I want to say something in connection with that, because I thought she managed to make the fact that her baby died not a very sad thing. You know, my heart didn't ache for her or something. The way she presented it, it was just happened.
It's like a newspaper reporter.
You disagree?
I disagree.
It was really a fun read. I almost saw it as a movie while I was reading it. You could see it on a screen almost. So, I mean, I give credit to Jill that for somebody who's a poet who hadn't written a novel before, you know, good job, Jill. Like, you need to hear it from me, but it's true. I thought she did a really nice job.